Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today to our latest Leo Beck Institute online program, which is called Kibbutz on Clay Soil, How Images Speak. Our talk today is about a kibbutz that was created in 1935 by a doctor in the city of Franeker in the Netherlands. That's up in Friesland. It became a kibbutz, a training ground for young Jews who were hoping to gain skills in agriculture and physical labor in preparation for making aliyah, or immigration, to a new life in Palestine. The first people there were not directly under the threat of Nazism, but in 1940, the Nazis occupied the Netherlands. The kibbutz continued to operate in that time, and it also, through this time, took in a number of young Jews who had previously escaped Germany and Austria, only to find themselves again in Nazi-controlled Europe. They spent their days doing agricultural work for local farmers, gaining experience, and at night studying Hebrew language and Jewish history in preparation to escape. But sadly, the community was not to last. It was closed down in the end of 1941, early 1942. In 2022, a memorial was created at the site of the kibbutz in Franeker, accompanied by an exhibit at the city museum, and a book was written about the kibbutz as well. Among those who lived in Franeker and did survive the Holocaust was our former volunteer at the Leo Beck Institute, Arthur Rath. He volunteered with us for nearly 20 years here, and he, upon his death, left us papers and documents relating to his time in Franeker, which was very interesting for us because he never talked about the war much with us. So for the presentation, I'd like to welcome Dr. Syds Wiersma. He is a historian at the University of Tilburg. He has been involved in both research for the exhibit that took place recently in Franeker, and has also helped doing research for the recently published book on the same topic. Mr. Wiersma is going to provide us a historical overview of the Kibbutz Franeker, as well as highlight some individual stories. I wanted to say before we begin a little bit, it's perhaps timely that we are talking about unintentionally, that we're talking about Jewish youth movements and efforts to reach Palestine in light of the terrible situation going on in Israel today. And we're thinking of everyone who has been affected, who has people lost, missing, people in the military, etc. So our thoughts are with all the victims. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Syds Wiersma to begin his presentation. The presentation will run half an hour, let's say, maybe a little over, and it will be followed by a question and answer session. So as you listen, you can start thinking of questions you'd like to ask. You're welcome to share your questions in the chat, and we will answer them that way. Or you could also raise your hand. But all the questions will wait till after the presentation. So Syds, go ahead and begin. And I look forward to it.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
Of course.
I'm very happy to be here. Hello, everybody. I can't see you, but hopefully you can see me and hear me, which is even more important. I asked Michael beforehand whether it was a good moment to do a presentation, a historical presentation about a kibbutz in the Netherlands in this horrible situation, with this horrible situation in Israel. But he convinced me that it was a right moment, because it has to do, of course, with the immigration history of Israel, Palestine, and of the roots of the state of Israel. So I decided to do it. It's here, not really middle of the night. We're here 8:30 p.m. in the Netherlands. So it's a little bit dark, perhaps, in the screen around me, and you are in full sunshine, probably. I hope to lead you through a part of the history of the Kibbutz of Franeker, in which Michael already said Arthur Roth participated. I will first focus on a little bit on the overall history, also on the approach of the research we did on the Kibbutz of Franeker, and then I will focus. The second part of my presentation is really focused on Arthur. We found some very interesting facts and photographs of him, and well, he 2 years of his life he lived in Franeker, but I'll tell you more about that later on. If I'm correct, you see now my PowerPoint screen. Is that right? Everybody
That
can
is
see.
correct. You're
That
looking
is correct.
great. Mm-hmm.
Okay, then you see that I work for the Frisian Film and Audio Archive, which is one of the big regional audiovisual archives in the Netherlands. We're in the north of the Netherlands, in the capital of Leeuwarden, which is for about 25 kilometers from Franeker, more to the east in the province. We have a very big collection, and I start with telling you about how we discovered these very special film footage of the Franeker Kibbutz. It was, I think, in 2018 that there was at a certain moment a DVD lying on my desk with a note from a certain Bettina Polak from Egmond aan Zee in the west of the Netherlands, and she wrote in her letter that she had visited Israel because she was a far niece of the family Bramson, who was living in Jerusalem, and she visited them, and then they told her that there was special film footage which they a few years ago had brought to Yad Vashem, and the topic was, for the most part, the Kibbutz of Franeker. Bettina had not heard of it, but she was interested and asked for a copy of these film footage, and then they put it on a DVD, sent it to her, and then she asked where can I bring this footage, which is the best place to archive it in the Netherlands. And first she went to the City Museum in Franeker, and there they told, go to the Frisian Film and Audio Archive and let them know that this footage exists. So then it started, and to be honest, I had never heard of a kibbutz in Franeker. And all the people I asked about, for them the same. No one had heard about it. We started a little online research, and we found a few digitized articles in newspapers or journals in the 70s and in the 80s about this kibbutz. But it was clear that the history of it had never really been researched. So for us, that was a moment that we said, before we want to share this footage, which we always try if it is special, we have to find out about the context, because otherwise you put footage online or you share it with musea, but if you don't have the story, it doesn't tell anything. So we started with a research, and that was, I think, in 2019, a half a year before COVID broke out. Well, to give you an impression of where we are located, you see, of course, Amsterdam. Amsterdam is important for this story because the headquarters of the Mizrahi Zionist movement, to which the kibbutz in Franeker belonged, was located in Amsterdam. Then you see in the east of the Netherlands, a small place called Almelo. And that was in fact the first place where the Mizrahi movement in the Netherlands started a kibbutz. It was partly also what they called Einzelhachshara, so a single education training to be a farmer. People, Chalutzim, pioneers, starting their training there, they, for the most part, lived at the farmer's house. It was not really a kibbutz. So it was not very ideal. And then there came a moment that the headquarters said, we have to start a real kibbutz. And then Dr. Bramson in Franeker, who was a psychiatrist in the town of Franeker and a Zionist, he already had visited Palestine in 32, I believe. And he had plans to start a Jewish community, a Hachshara community near Franeker, because he said that, well, the best farmers and the best soil in the Netherlands is in that part of the Netherlands, in the northwest, which once was sea, was diked, new land, and the soil is very fertile. So it was an ideal places. The farms, there were many farms, cattle breeding, but also what we called mixed farming with crops, vegetables, grains, etc. So it was an ideal place to start a kibbutz, but there was not really a building. And then an old station building came free, and they managed to rent it. And then the kibbutz of Franeker could start, and most of the people, most of the Chalutzim and Almelo were transferred to Franeker. Then we go from Franeker in the north to the west. You see under the word North Holland, Beverwijk, which is a sea town. It's lying very near to the sea. And after Franeker, that was the third kibbutz the Mizrahi movement started. But Beverwijk was also, from 1940, when the Germans occupied the Netherlands, was also a place where people couldn't live anymore. It was the whole coastline of the Netherlands became part of the Atlantic Wall. So also the kibbutz was ended, and then they started a fourth kibbutz to the east in the blue zone, which you see on the map is called Gelderland. And then you see a white word, Laagkeppel. And that was the fourth kibbutz, which was created for the Mizrahi movement in the Netherlands. So that's in short the story of the Mizrahi kibbutz and the topography of it. To be complete, there were about 10 to 15 kibbutzim in the Netherlands in the 1930s. I won't bother you with other places, but it would be great to have an integral study about kibbutzim in the Netherlands. It has never been done. At some places there are local studies, but it is time, I think, to start an integral study of the kibbutzim in the Netherlands in the 1930s. Okay, I'll go on. We're back in Franeker. And this is an image of the building on the Harlingerweg, number 45. And this is in fact, the old station building, which was empty and became a kibbutz. And here you see the group which lived there for about, I think, 1939. Then there was a group of 15 pioneers living there. The girls sleeping upstairs and the boys downstairs. Atta Rath has written beautiful things about how they live together, but that is for later. I will tell you about that later more. So the Harlingerweg 45 in Franeker. I already told you that the building is still there. I made a picture of it in 2019. The building has a little bit adapted, rebuilt. but if you see clearly, if you see sharp, you can find the similarities. And if you have a look at the photo beneath, then you see that the parking place on the right of the building, that was the trail of the farmer railway, which you see on the photo above. And now it is not a kibbutz anymore. It has had many functions, but it is now an art gallery. And the owners of the gallery, they were really very cooperative during the research we did, because we needed, of course, the building in the research. There were a lot of things to see, but also to identify people on photos and to put the photos in a good context. We needed the owners of the building, and they cooperated in a great way with us. So a kibbutz, a hachshara, not too long. It started in 1934, first in a house in the center of Franeker. But in 1935, this station building came free, and then they moved in 1935 to the station. This is also a very striking photo, you see, because this is the group who lived there in the winter of 1939, 1940. And that was really one of the harshest winters in the 20th century in the Netherlands. It was one of the years that the famous 11 city skating contest took place. It took also place in the winter of 41 and in the winter of 42, which never happened before, 3 times in a row, and never happened again. So they are here in the snow in this very harsh winter. Probably a sunny day. They almost don't wear their jackets. And this is a nice photo also in relation to the story of Arthur, because you can see him in the left, the first boy in the sitting row. So in fact, the second one from the left sitting. I will prove that it is him later on, because then I will match this photo with other photos we discovered of Arthur. During this whole period of 7 years, there were about 100 pioneers Chalutzim who got their training in the Hachshara of Franeker. And they were trained for in about 15 farmers who were connected to the whole project. 15 farmers having their farms in the environment of Franeker. 50%, about 15% of the 100 Chalutzim who lived in Franeker had their aliyah to Palestine. 50%. And in fact, you could say that 50% of the pioneers having lived in Franeker were really rescued, were saved by the fact that there was a kibbutz in Franeker. This is the old station building from the west side. And then in May the 10th of 1940, the German occupation started. That was, of course, a traumatic moment for most of the Chalutzim at that moment living in the kibbutz, because I think that half of the population then of the kibbutz were refugees from Germany, Poland, or Austria, refugees from pogroms or from the Kristallnacht, which took place, of course, in 1938. So they thought they had escaped the Germans, but then the Germans were again and even massive in Franeker, because Franeker became a garrison town. There were about 1,500 German soldiers who were garrisoned in the town. And the headquarters of the Germans was a building which was directly next to the kibbutz. So when the German officers, they went in that building, they could simply see everything what happened on the kibbutz. So there was a threatening situation. And also later on, it became a fatal situation. Of the 100 Chalutzim who lived at that place, we found out that there were 24 victims eventually of the Holocaust. Not all of them belonged to the last group who got stuck from 1940 in Franeker, but a few of them had already left the kibbutz earlier in the 1930s, and, for example, decided to quit with the training or went to another kibbutz and got stuck there. But 24 of them, of all these 100 we discovered, we identified, were victims eventually. Well, perhaps you're curious to know how people live there, so I will show you a few activities, and I show you that with a row of images. There was horse riding, because horse riding was an important way of transport in Palestine. So they needed to learn to ride the horse. There was gardening, especially the women living at the kibbutz. They didn't do the real hard work at the farms. Most of them were gardeners, were trained as a gardener. Cow milking was perhaps the activity which was most known in the kibbutz. Here you see a typical Frisian image, that the legs of the cow, they are bound, and then you can milk the cow. This is Eliasher. He's from Amsterdam, and he was known as a very good cow milker. And also he gave training to his colleagues at the kibbutz to learn to milk the cow. Of course, haying in the summer. Ploughing. You see an image of the very harsh clay, which is typical of the area around Franeker. Chicken breeding. One of the Chalutza in the kibbutz, she found a place, a farm where she was trained in chicken breeding. Gardening again, but also doing the laundry and nursing each other when someone was sick, caring for each other, praying. This is in the garden. The kibbutz was a small wood near the kibbutz, and the picture has been taken there. It's also studying. In the back you see the rabbi of the Franeker Kibbutz, Joshua Wolf, and in front again Eliasher. Eliasher was not only a very good cow milker, but he was fluent in Hebrew. He had learned that in the youth Aliyah, and he read it fluently and also spoke it. So he was also a trainer for the rest in Hebrew. And then you see here the peeling of the potatoes, which was probably a daily affair in the kibbutz, also here in the garden. And then there were children, of course, as well. In the back you see Mrs. Bramson, the wife of Jacob Bramson, the initiator of the kibbutz. And she had 3 children. In the right under you see Joseph, and Joseph was also the son who brought later in around 2013, 2014, the film footage to Yad Vashem, and Betin Polak was connected to him. Everything started, as I said, with film footage. So I'm now going to show you the film footage, two small films of 3 to 4 minutes. I won't tell a lot during the film. Some remarks, but I think the best is to view it in silence. This is one of the farms very close to Franeker. And Leon Wexler here, he is trying to get the lost potatoes from the land, you could say. This is a farmer's family, a widow and her daughter, where Eliasher followed his training. The park, city park of Franeker, and then moving images of the horse riding. This is the building next to the kibbutz. There you see the remains of the old railway trail. Beautiful images, very powerful. People, Franeker standing in the back, looking what these mad Chalutzim, these mad Jews were doing in this old building. Also beautiful view of the western side of the kibbutz. It's joyous, you could say. People have fun. But if you read the memoirs of Auke Rath, and for example, Morris Schnitzer as well, there was also a lot of tension, frustration, social conflicts in the building. 20 people, young people living in a very small space, almost no privacy, very hardworking. It's logical that there was also tension and conflicts. But this is cheerful. This is Eli Asher again. He had talents for a lot of things, you can see, not only milking and Hebrew, but also horse riding. I didn't tell you that you won't see Auke Rath on the film footage because Auke. Oh wait, I go to the next film, second part. This is the pear tree, which is still standing there next to the kibbutz and giving almost every year fruit, as the owner now told me and also showed me. So they had a kind of orchard next to the building. I told you about Auke Rath. He is not in the film footage because he arrived in Franeker around October 39. And this film footage was taken in a period of 2 times. They started about in the middle of 1937, and Bramson stopped around the middle of 1939. So just before the period Auke arrived. And Bramson did not only make this footage for fun, he was a very motivated amateur filmer, but he also used it to show it in other places of the Netherlands for fundraising. So he told the story of the kibbutz in Franeker through film, which was quite modern, of course, in these times. We know this because we read announcements of readings he gave in the Netherlands at certain moments and certain places. Here you see this big man in front. That is the chair of Dat Wa'aretz, the Mizrahi movement I told you already about. Dat Wa'aretz, faith and land. And he was in Franeker for the visit, probably. His name is Eli Dasberg. Eli Asher again. Of course, the cows. And this is very interesting part of the film, because you see here the whole process of milking and processing the milk afterwards. So this is also a quite unique film part, even for us as a film archive, because it has all these steps in the process have been filmed very nicely. This is the family Bramson again, Carolina, wife of Jacob, and her, in this case, 2 children. The oldest is at school, probably. Doing the laundry together. Here, Rabbi Wolf again, and Eliasher in front of him. Peeling the potatoes again. Doing the laundry. And this is Batya Bramson, who still is living in Jerusalem. I visited her last year when we made the recordings of the documentary about which I will tell you later more. Joseph Bramson, Reina, the eldest one, and Joseph in the arms of Meir Friedman, who was also a rabbi, by the way. He got his training in Montreux in France. So that was the footage, very powerful. And because of the footage, which is so beautiful, but also because of the story was completely forgotten in Franeker and in Friesland and in the Netherlands, we decided to start a research. And then the starting point for us was to go to the city archive of Franeker and to try to find all the people who had been living on that certain address of Harlingerweg 45. Everything has been recorded, people moving in, people moving out, people moving on, everything has been recorded. So we are quite sure that about 100 people we found, that was the complete population during that period of 34 to 41. And that was the starting point, because you have to start with names, and you don't get only names, but sometimes also a photograph and also information about where people come from. And that's very valuable information in such a starting moment of a research. because if you have names, you can start with online research, and you find everywhere names and photos and information, and that was also the way how we came to the National Archive, because we found out that in the Department of Justice there is an archive, a very complete archive of the Immigration Service, and all of the people living in the Kibbutz of Franeker who came from abroad, they were obliged to report themselves to the Immigration Service. Also, Datwa Aretz had reports on them, where they came from, what kind of people they were, how they looked like. And in this Immigration Service archive for the foreigners, you have all the photographs as well. So if you find a name from a pioneer in Franeker, then you also have a photograph. And then you can identify people in the film footage, but also in other photos you get during the research. Yad Vashem and the Ghetto Fighters House in Israel were very important archives for getting information from family archives. And as I said, the film footage, the original film footage, is also stored in the archive of Yad Vashem. I already mentioned the online research. We found databases and we found family trees and names. And so we steadily got a rather complete picture of these 100 people who had lived in the kibbutz. Very important source for us was the memoirs. We discovered two. The first one was the memoirs of Morris Schnitzer. Morris Schnitzer has written a beautiful book about his life. He survived. He was one of the kibbutzim, of the Chalutzim in Franeker. He survived the war. He emigrated to Canada, and he wrote his memoirs with two chapters, very detailed, about his life in Franeker. The second one are the memoirs, and we are very grateful to Michael that he interviewed Arthur, and then together, I've understood, written the memoirs of Arthur. Also, Arthur writes very detailed about his time in Franeker and about the relations he had there, about the work he did, and about the situation. This is Escape from the Edge, the memoirs of Morris Schnitzer. And then we did also interviews, but that was, in fact, a last step in the research. We got contacts with very many people in Israel, because I already told you the half of the people who had lived in Franeker emigrated to Palestine. So there are a lot of descendants of Franeker Chalutzim living in Israel. And so we went to Israel last year and did several interviews with family, with descendants. And here you see a picture of Batya Bramson and her husband. Batya is still living, and she is the small girl in the film footage you saw. Very important source, because she could tell us about her youth in Franeker and how they visited the kibbutz, how she visited with her mother the kibbutz many times. And also newspapers and periodicals, but that speaks for itself, I think. There are a few very interesting periodicals of Jewish life in the Netherlands, and the Mizrahi movement in the Netherlands had also their own periodical, in which, for example, Chalutzim in Franeker wrote articles or made descriptions of how they lived at the kibbutz. After a great part of the research was done, we decided to do an exhibition. Michael already told you, I think, something about it. An exhibition in the City Museum in Franeker. And after that, we started to write a book. The main writer was Auke Zeldenrust, and I assisted him with research, but also with making a complete list of the residents of the kibbutz and their fate. And then we started after the book, or in fact a little bit during the writing of the book, also with a documentary. We went to Israel with a director, Gerrit van der Veer. He is on the left below, and the cameraman Heiko Jonker. And of course, we were also in the old city of Jerusalem, where a lot of the Chalutzim who emigrated also found their living. But the most special moment for me during all these research and presentations was in fact the monument for the victims. The municipality of Franeker decided at a certain moment during the research that they wanted to create a monument for the victims. I told you already there were 24. And they asked a famous artist in Friesland to make this monument. It's, as you see, in front of the old kibbutz building, which is the white one behind that car. And it is, in fact, along the old railway track. The path, the cycling path you see here is the track where once the train drove. So there's the monument, and it was opened with descendants of former Chalutzim of Franeker in the presence of the mayor of Franeker and also the highest official of the province of Friesland. It was a very emotional moment. Okay, I promised you to focus on Arthur. I could tell you a lot of personal stories. I think of the 100 Chalutzim of Franeker, we have about 50. We found about 50 personal stories with a lot of pictures and ego documents, etc. But I will focus now on Arthur. And as I told you, we started in the city archives, and this was the first we found about Arthur. His full name, that he was born in Essen in January 22 in 1990. His parents were Adolf Rath and Anna Schönbach. And he arrived in Franeker on the 13th, I should say, of November in 1939. And he was arrested on the 3rd of November in 1941, when the kibbutz was raided by the Gestapo and the Franeker police. And we also found out that his brother Julius, Uri, was his name in Palestine, had also got his training in Franeker in 1936 already. He was there for a few months, and after July 36, he emigrated to Palestine. So it was not a coincidence, I think, that Arthur also ended up in Franeker. And then the memoirs, a very important moment. A colleague of mine, Kelly Bauer, she did a lot of online research about the kibbutz. And then when we had the name of Arthur, we Googled on his name, and then we came to the Leeuwbach Institute and found out that the family archive of Arthur has been stored there. And then we started to mail with the Leeuwbach Institute, and Michael, he answered, and he told us that there were very special memoirs written by him and Arthur together. And as I said, it was a very important source for us to get a clear picture of how life really was at the kibbutz, and it was not always very easy. This is a picture Michael sent us. So then we had a clue to other pictures we already found. I already showed you the winter picture of the winter of 1939, 1940. And then you see that this must be Arthur Rath at that picture. The similarity is striking. There's, I think, no other conclusion. It is very, very striking as well that Arthur is, as I told you, not in a film, but he is almost nowhere in all these photographs we have. And I think the reason is that he came relatively late, the end of 39. And from 1940 on, when the Germans invaded the Netherlands, the photographing and also the filming, of course, stopped. Most of the photos are from the period before the invasion, and this is one of them, and Arthur is on it. What we also found were Arthur's files in the archives of the Immigration Service. And I will tell you later on something about it, because these are very important in relation to the flight of the family later from the Netherlands to first Marseille in France and later on Switzerland. Arthur, unfortunately, I haven't known him. That's a pity, very pity, because if I read his memoirs, they are beautiful. He has a lot of humor. He is self-ironic, and the writings are great. So I wanted to share a few quotations from these memoirs with you about his period in Franeker. I arrived at a godforsaken railroad station in Franeker at darkness, where Moshe Heller, whom I soon came to respect for his intelligence and his wit, picked me up. This is Moshe Heller, the man standing, the second one from the left. He didn't survive. He belonged also to the group who was arrested in November 41. Arthur in his memoirs tells us about the daily schedule, getting up at 3, getting on your bike at 3:30, cycling for about 45 minutes to a farm, starting to milk, and returning to the farm about 6 p.m. Well, you can calculate, so it must have been a very, very harsh existence, very hard working. And he tells us also that when people got back from the farm and after the dinner they had together, they spontaneously fell asleep. Learning Hebrew, learning Jewish religion, learning about Palestine. Well, the idea was very nice, and the motivation was perhaps great, but in practice it was very hard to do it next to this hard working at the farm. He also tells us about the layout of the building. I already told you. It tells about how that the girls are sleeping on the first floor, or on the ground floor, and the boys on the second floor. Several boys, about 10 boys, I think, in a small room. And he tells us about personal relationships. He also tells us about Friesland. The constant battle against nature had hardened the Frisian farmers and fishermen, and they couldn't and wouldn't waste time on the manifestation of sentimentality or softness. Well, Arthur had the luck to have met with a farmer who was very nice to him, but we also have memoirs or witnesses who tell about very cruel farmers who don't mention your name, only say to you, you Jew, who were hard and cruel. This is, for example, what Morris Schnitzer writes in his memoirs. So the situation for everyone was different, and when you were lucky, you had met a good farmer. He also says, I was neither physically nor mentally prepared for farming, let alone farming in Friesland. Well, misery is when you step down on your pedals to overcome the force of the wind and don't seem to make any headway. That's very self-ironic, of course, but it's true. I mean, I cycled for 6 years from a village in Friesland to the city to go to school, and I know that it is really misery to have to cycle against this headwind, against this strong headwinds. And this is one of the few bicycles we found on the pictures. This is Hans Martin Kohl. He was also living there during the period Arthur was there, so they must have known each other. And well, it's extra hard, of course, when you have someone on your back on the bicycle. This is what Arthur writes about his farmer. The name of the farmer was Mr. Kickstra. He says he showed a surprising empathy, not by overburdening me with tasks he knew I wasn't fit to handle. We all looked forward to the Shabbat, which not only promised a respite from the physical routine, but also more copious, varied meals, although meatless, and some mental stimulation. And he also tells that late Friday noon, he rushed to the local library, and then he gets from the library woman a lot of books, especially written by Teun de Vries, which is the most famous Frisian writer in the Dutch literature. He writes in Dutch, but he writes a lot about the situation in Friesland. And Arthur loved that writer. He compares him with the most famous authors in Europe in that time. And this is probably an image of Shabbat at the kibbutz. The only day they had time for themselves. A few other quotations. I lacked a personal commitment to the cause. Frustrated in my attempts to connect with the opposite sex. So that were two frustration points for Arthur. He wasn't really a farmer. He was already very early aware of that. But of course, it was an important place to be to get this training because it was the way to escape Europe. And he writes also about his frustration. He wants to make relations with girls. A few of them were already engaged, and he was not really interested in the rest of them, he writes very openly. 3 of the girls who lived together with Arthur. On the right, Judith Wolf. In the middle, Marianne Koen. No, I'm sorry. In the middle is Bracha Arnon. And at the left, you see Marianne Koenreuter. All the 3 of them were gardeners. So now, after having tried to put a safe distance between us and the Nazis, German officers became our neighbors. What an irony. And also what a fatal coincidence. This was the headquarters of the Germans in Franeker, and it is in fact the neighbor building of the kibbutz. If you stand before one of these big windows on the first floor, you can see everything what happens in the kibbutz. That must have been very threatening, as I told you before. And these were the officers, the German officers living there. This is a still from another film we found in Franeker, which was made during the war. And then the arrest, November the 3rd in 1941. The fatal day for the kibbutz in Franeker. And although these memoirs of Arthur are beautiful, there's one gap. I've asked Michael about it, but we couldn't really explain it, why the gap is there. Perhaps he can tell something about it later on. But there is a gap while Moshe Schnitzer, Morris Schnitzer tells very detailed about this day and how the Germans arrested them. Arthur tells nothing about it. He tells about life on the kibbutz, and one part later, we are in Westerbork, to which the arrested Chalutzim were sent, which was the refugee camp for Jews in the Netherlands. So there is a gap, and he doesn't tell about the raid, and he doesn't tell anything about the names of his friends, of his inmates who were arrested together with him, and he doesn't tell anything about the 6 weeks detention he made through in the jail of Leeuwarden, when the 12 residents of the kibbutz, among which Arthur, were arrested by the Germans and the Franeker police. They were transported to the jail in Leeuwarden, and the first plan of the Gestapo was deporting them to Mauthausen. But the chief rabbi of Leeuwarden, he intervened. He was also the rabbi of the refugee camp in Westerbork, and in some way he managed to get them change their mind and send the foreigners of the arrested people to Westerbork, and letting free the 3 Dutch people, letting them free after 6 weeks detention. And then we are December the 17th, 1941. This is the jail in Leeuwarden. And December the 17th, Arthur arrives with his friends in Westerbork. And he tells about that period that he was one of the builders of the new garrison in the camp. So in fact, he was preparing for the later stage of the camp, when it became a doorgangslager in July 42, and the first transports to the east started. Of course, they had no idea about that. And then the flight in June 1942. Arthur has a few days off. He's going to Amsterdam. His family is living in Utrecht, his mother, his sister, his father. His sister tries to convince him that he has to share their plans to flee the Netherlands, because there's no future for them. At first he refuses because he don't want to leave his friends in Westerbork. But luckily, he says in his memoirs that his sister convinced him. And if he had been 1 month later, it would have been too late, because in July 1942, the transports to the east start. And already in the first transport, going from Westerbork to Auschwitz, 3 of the comrades of Arthur, Chalutzim from the Kibbutz of Franeker, were in that transport. So I think Arthur had no chance if he had chosen to refuse the offer of his sister and join them in the flight, and if he had gone back to Westerbork. To conclude, as I said, he writes about his flight, the flight of his family to Marseille and later to Switzerland. And we also found interesting documents in his files in the archive of the Immigration Service, photographs, and a police report about his disappearance and a search warrant. So after they fled, the police started to look for him. And luckily he was already in Belgium then, in Antwerp. What we also found were a kind of, how do you say that? These are letters of you could say good behavior or good talents. When Arthur arrived in Switzerland, there was a moment that he decided to follow a training in agronomy. And then he needed references. And so he wrote to his former two farmers in the Netherlands, Mr. Kikstra and Achlem, and another one of which the name escapes me now. But he asked them to send references, and these farmers did this. And these are beautiful documents. That's the second one. Mr. van der Schaar has signed the letter. So that's the story, very much in short, of course. I could tell you a lot of more details, but I think it's time for questions. But before that, I'm very grateful to have this, that Michael sent me these pictures of Arthur, which are very, very nice to see. The story could go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Syds. That was very nice. You're welcome.
Please like and subscribe to receive more content from the Leo Baeck Institute.